I am Nestle Feliciano and I will be the first reporter.
In our topic, we will discuss about on how government influence on trade, rationale for government intervention and forms of control. So, what is government? The term government refers to a governing body that takes decision and implements policies to benefit its population. The government supports its citizens equally in the midst of discrimination and injustice. It keeps society in order by preserving peace. So there are six functions of government. First, protective functions. The government is responsible to maintain peace and security in the country and to defend the country against external aggression. For this purpose, the government maintains police and the armed forces. Second, administrative functions. The government is responsible for the administration of the country. Various administrative departments are established by government for this purpose. Third, social functions. The government provides social services to public like education, health, housing, transportation and communication, and etc. These services are vital for the welfare of the society. Fourth, development functions. The development of different sections of the economy is not possible without the state help. The government should develop irrigation, transportation and communications, industrial and agricultural system of the country for the rapid increase in the rate of economic growth. Fifth, make policies and laws and implement them so as to promote development of the country. 6. Trade function. It facilitates trade within and outside the country. Let's move on to the role of governments in trade. The government's role in trade policies include regulation, allocation, distribution, and stabilization, although not only limited to just trade. Governments do intervene in free trade, imposing many sanctions, tariffs, quotas, and other economic policies to limit free trade. Regarding the role of government specific to the trade policy, government should be involved to a certain extent with the major decisions, not just being made by one body or group. Through the idea of free trade with the specific sectors in the industry, adopting protectionism traits to safeguard their local goods and services will ultimately bring a country more economic growth and stability. What is government intervention? This is a regulatory action taken by government that seek to change the decision made by individuals, groups, or organizations about social and economic matters. Let's take a look why there is governmental intervention in international trade or the exchange of goods between national borders. There are actually two reasons for government in international trade: political and economic. The political arguments for trade intervention are plentiful. Political reason. This is to protect jobs and overall industries from international business. Another key political reason for the government intervention in trade is the protection of national security. Governments also intervene in trade policy for economic reasons. One of the biggest reasons is to protect new industries from fierce competition. This matter is especially important to the industries in developing countries who might not survive up against larger nations. The last economic reason for government intervention is based on the strategic trade policy, which cites that due to scale economies, only a few large global firms would survive if not the government intervention.
Good day, ma'am. I am Laika Frio and I am the next presenter. So, bakit nga ba may mga government intervention sa market? This is to correct market failure, to maximize social welfare for microeconomic factors and for socioeconomic factors. So, unahin natin itong to correct market failure. Market failure may manifest in difference such as the overproduction of demerit goods, negative externalities, and imperfect information access. Market failure results in loss of net social welfare as it negatively impacts third parties and consumers. Kung wala ang mga intervention na ginagawa ng gobyerno, mai-stuck or maiipit ang market sa ganitong sitwasyon. Kaya napakahalaga ng government intervention dahil tinutulungan nito ang market to run efficiently and effectively na nakikinabang ang lahat ng economic agents. Next is to maximize social welfare. In unregulated market, there is a risk of organization operating with monopoly power. This can result in the overpricing of products and a lack of healthy competition in the market. All of this ultimately leads to lower consumer surplus and deadweight welfare loss to society. Mahalagang makialam ang pamahalaan at direktang matugunan ang mga isyong ito sa pamamagitan ng mga regulation that control the actions and consequences of markets. Sa ganoong paraan, mapapabuti at mapakikinabangan ng pamahalaan ang kabuuang kapakanan ng lipunan. Next is the macroeconomic factors. To minimize the damage caused by naturally occurring economic events such as recession or inflation, the government would intervene to make sure the market economy is working efficiently. The government uses subsidies and regulation to encourage the production, buying and selling of commodities in the economy to achieve growth in GDP. And the last one is the socio-economic factors. In situations where there is inequity and inequality, the government would intervene to promote general economic fairness. The government can reallocate financial resources by using means such as taxation and government spending on welfare programs. There are 4 types of government intervention, which are the taxes, subsidies, price controls, and regulation, and we will be going to discuss it one by one. So first is the taxes. When we say taxes, it is an amount of money that a government requires people to pay according to their income, the value of their property, and that is used to pay for the things done by the government. In the context of market intervention, taxes are used to influence the behaviors of producers and consumers in the market. Ang tax ay pwedeng direct and indirect, pero magfo-focus tayo sa indirect. The value-added tax or yung tinatawag na VAT ay halimbawa ng indirect tax. This type of tax impacts the cost of production, which is usually trickled down to consumers through the selling price. Next is subsidies. Subsidies is a direct or indirect payments to individuals or firms, usually in the form of a cash payment from the government or a targeted tax cut. Subsidies are benefits that remove some type of burden to promote social welfare. They can be direct or indirect. It lowers producers' costs, which causes an outward shift in supply. This is particularly helpful when there is underproduction of merit goods. Example, the government may give financial aid to business that produce and install solar panels. This reduces their costs and allows them to increase their supply of solar panels to consumers. The maximum price is also known as the price ceiling. Essentially, the government intervenes by setting a maximum price to prevent the market price from rising above a certain level. The government tends to use this when they want to help consumers if they feel the prices are too high. Example, maximum prices are used to rent controls to make housing more affordable. Ito ay beneficial sa mga household na may mababang kita. Nagsiset ng maximum price ang gobyerno para protektahan ang mga tenants mula sa mga landlords na nagtatangkang mangikil sa kanila. When we say minimum prices naman, it is also known as price floor. Essentially, the government intervenes by setting a minimum price to prevent the market price from being sold below a certain price. The government tends to use this when the market is unfair to producers. Minimum wage is an example of a minimum price. In the labor market, it is the lowest possible wage an employer can pay. Ito ay para pigilan ang mga employer mula sa mababang sahod ng mga manggagawa and also enabling people to maintain a certain standard of living. And the last type of government intervention is regulation. It is a rules made by a government or other authority in order to control the way something is done or the way people behave. Government might also intervene by passing regulation on the market to either encourage or discourage the consumption of goods and services. The purpose of government regulation is to promote social welfare. Example, the government makes it mandatory through regulation for people aged between 6 to 18 to attend some sort of schooling. This is because education is considered a merit good and it produces positive externalities. On the other hand, the government places regulation on illegal drugs and substances through bans. This prevents their consumption as they are known to be demerit goods and to produce negative externalities.
So, what are some reasons for governments intervening in international trade? First, protecting infant industries. Tariffs are intended to protect domestic enterprises against international competition that has already established itself. Customers will be encouraged to support local firms, and new enterprises will have more time to get up and running as a result of these tariffs. Next, national defense. In order to protect and secure domestic product, a government may apply high tariffs, weapons, sophisticated electronics, aircraft, and strategic minerals are obvious examples. Still, it's a good idea to store weapons and resources during times of peace when they are less expensive. Next, employment rates. Unemployment is something that no country wants to see increase. Governments should concentrate on fostering an environment that promotes high employment rates. If a country's economy is failing, the government may implement tariffs to encourage consumers to spend locally. This would secure and insulate their economy from outside competition. Next, environmental concerns. Tariffs are imposed by governments on imports that they believe are environmentally harmful because of the ecologically unfriendly nature of importing and exporting items from nations with weak environmental standards. Imports may be subject to some type of environmental tax. Next, aggressive trade. Unexpectedly and without notice, aggressive trading practices might arise. According to the World Bank's top economist, Dr. Ian Bhattacharjee, governments must put in place obstacles to develop or defend their economy from such aggressive trade practices. Emotional argument that certain trade restrictions and barriers are justified merely on the basis of emotion or feeling in some countries. China and Japan have great cultural connection to rice and think that rice farm outside of their countries is unsuitable for their citizens' palates. This may not make logical sense to others, yet it is acceptable to a lot of people. Consumer safety. The majority of things of any country's list is prohibited and restricted. Imports goods are considered harmful. In order to protect customers from unwholesome consumption, some animal products as well as items manufactured from endangered animals are frequently prohibited. Medical drugs. Every country has its own list of which medical drugs require two prescription from a doctor and which may be purchased without one. This list will vary by country depending on what health experts determine safe for an individual patient or the patient's own usage. And lastly, ensure that you are compliant. The government is more restrictive than ever when it comes to the transportation of products and individual in the midst of the COVID-19 outbreak. Avoid attempting to avoid taxes or importing or exporting illegal items. As a result, the impacts may have much further consequences.
When we say trade controls, these are restrictions imposed on the transfer of goods from one country to another. These controls ensure that particular items and technologies do not end up in the wrong hands. Why should the government put controls on trade? To safeguard domestic industries, trade controls are used to reduce foreign competition. Import tariffs raise the price of foreign goods and make them less competitive against domestic goods. There are three primary means to restrict trade, which are quota system, tariffs, and subsidies. First is the quota system. When we say quota system, these are imposes restriction on the specific number of goods imported into one country. Quota system allow governments to control the quantity of imports to help protect domestic industries. Next is the tariffs. When we say tariffs, these are fees paid on imported goods. And the last one is subsidies. Subsidies are grants given to domestic industries to help them develop and compete with foreign producers. Through subsidies, domestic producers can charge less for their goods without losing money due to the outside grants. Now, we will be going to discuss the government's influence on markets. So first, we will be discuss the currency inflation. Only governments have the legal authority to create the respective currencies. Governments have a substantial and far-reaching influence on markets due to their ability to regulate everything from monetary policy to currency prices to the rules and regulations that impact each industry.
Interest rates. This is another popular weapon even though they are often used to counteract inflation. This is because they can spur the economy separately from inflation. The term Federal Reserve, as opposed to raising them, encourages companies and individuals to borrow more and buy more. Next is the bailouts. It can skew the market by changing the rules to allow poorly run the companies to survive. Bailouts also can hurt the shareholders of the rescued company or the company's lender. In normal markets condition, these firms would go out of business and see their asset to sold more efficient firms to pay creditors and, if possible, for the shareholders.
Subsidies and tariffs. These are essentially the same things from the perspective of the taxpayer. In the case of subsidy, the government taxes the general public and gives the money to a chosen industry to make it more profitable. In the case of tariff, the government applies taxes to foreign products to make them more expensive, allowing the domestic suppliers to charge more for their product. Regulations and the corporate tax. The business world rarely complains about bailouts to certain industries, perhaps because of the knowledge that their industry may one day need help as well. But Wall Street does object when it comes to regulations and taxes. That's because while subsidies and tariffs can give an industry a comparative advantage, regulation and taxes can negatively impact profits. High taxes on corporate profits have a different effect in that they may discourage companies from coming into the country. Just a state with low taxes can lure away companies from their neighbors. Countries that less will tend to attract any mobile corporations. Worse yet, the companies that can't move end up paying the higher tax and at a competitive disadvantage in business as well as for attracting investor capital. Lastly, the bottom line. Governments play a substantial role in the financial world. Regulations, subsidies, and taxes can have an immediate and long lasting impact on companies and whole industries. For this reason, Fisher, Price, and some other famous investors considered legislative risk as notable factor when evaluating stocks. A great investment can turn out to be not that great if it is at risk of seeing its competitive advantage and profit dwindle as a result of certain government action. This ends our topic. Thank you for listening.